Harper Quinn lived her life in the frantic space between 3 different jobs. At 28 years old, the title of single mother defined her entire existence in San Cascadia. Her mornings were spent as an online math tutor, patiently explaining fractions over a lagging internet connection. Her nights were a blur of night deliveries, the smell of cooling pizza permanently baked into her sedan. Weekends were for babysitting, watching other people's children in homes that didn't threaten to collapse. She juggled all of it to pay the rent on a cramped apartment in the Old Rail District, a neighborhood of brick and rust where the air still smelled of diesel. Even that refuge was threatening to dissolve. Her landlord, citing the hot market, had just slipped a notice under her door. The rent was going up, way up. The text message arrived while she was balancing 2 bags of groceries and her daughter's backpack. It was from a name she didn't recognize, North Shore Guardian Service. It sounded sterile, corporate. They were requesting an urgent interview for a private tutoring position. The location made her stop cold Vascari Tower. The compensation they listed wasn't just money. It was air. It was enough to silence the eviction notice, to fix the rattling sound in her car, to buy her 6-year-old daughter, Piper, new shoes without checking the clearance rack first. It was survival. But the name Vascari came with baggage, and the Old Rail District was built on whispers. Lucien Vascari, the man who owned the tower, and, according to the rumors, most of the city's shadows, he was a billionaire, Don, impossibly wealthy and utterly private. The whispers also spoke of his son. They said Vascari had hired and fired 13 tutors in the last 6 months alone. They said the boy was impossible, that the tutors left the tower looking broken. The next morning, Harper held Piper's small hand as they walked to the local public school. The building was drab, a fading mural of sea lions peeling off the wall, a paper sign taped to the door announcing more staffing cuts. Piper, oblivious and brave, skipped ahead. Harper watched her disappear into the chaos of the schoolyard, her heart a tight fist in her chest. She had to take this chance, even if it was with a dangerous man. Hours later, Harper stepped out of a cab and into a different world. Vascari Tower pierced the gray San Cascadia fog, a monument of glass and steel. The lobby was vast, silent. The air didn't smell like the city. It smelled of rich cedar, sharp roasted coffee, and the faint, clean tang of polished metal. The only sound was the distant, sharp click of leather shoes on marble, a sound so assured it echoed. Harper, in her best blazer and worn flats, felt utterly small, a stray leaf blown into a sterile vault. She forced her shoulders back. A man in a perfectly tailored suit intercepted her before she reached the reception desk. "Miss Quinn." It wasn't a question. "I am Aldo Moretti, legal counsel." His eyes were not welcoming. They were sharp, analytical. He was weighing her, measuring her utility against her potential risk. He scanned her from head to toe, and she felt the inadequacy of her second-hand clothes. "The only rule," Moretti said, his voice as dry as old paper, "is that you do not waste Mr. Vascari's time." She was escorted to a small, windowless conference room. A non-disclosure agreement was placed in front of her. It was thick, dozens of pages. At the bottom, a line indicated the agreement was monitored by the Metropolitan Integrity Office. Harper had never heard of it, but she knew a front when she saw one. This was Vascari's internal fortress, built of paper. She signed her name. Moretti led her to a private elevator. It moved with a silent, pressurized speed that made her ears pop. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that spanned the sky. He was there, standing before a wall of glass that looked down on the entire city, his back to her. Lucien Vascari. He turned, and the air left Harper's lungs. He was dressed in a charcoal suit so dark it was almost black, offset by a tie the color of deep wine. He was younger than the rumors suggested, but his presence was heavy. A faint, silver scar traced a line just beside his cheekbone, disappearing into his hairline. It wasn't a flaw, it was a warning. His eyes met hers. There was no greeting. He looked at her not as a person, but as a complex, perhaps interesting, problem. Harper felt a low, electric current pass between them, sharp and unnerving. "I do not need another teacher. Miss Quinn," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, but held an absolute, chilling lack of patience. "I have hired the best credentials in the state. I need someone to make Rowan comply." The word landed like a stone. Comply. Like a dog. Like a soldier. Harper felt the fear coiling in her stomach, the instinct to apologize, to make herself small. But then she thought of Piper's peeling school building, and a different, harder feeling took over. She met his intense gaze directly. "I don't make children comply, Mr. Vescari," she said, her voice quiet but rigid. "I make them want to." A flicker of something surprise, maybe even intrigue, crossed his features, but it was gone instantly. He turned and tapped a control on the wall, a massive screen, previously hidden, lit up. It was security footage, grainy, silent, a woman with a kind face backing out of a room, her hands slightly raised as if in surrender. Another clip, a stern-looking man, sitting in a hallway, his head buried in his hands. A third, a young, bright-eyed woman, running for the elevator, her shoulders shaking with sobs, the 13. Lucian turned back to her, his face impassive, the challenge laid bare. Harper looked at the screen, at the ghosts of the people who had failed. She saw their degrees, their experience, all of it breaking against the silence of one small boy. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of Piper. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with his. "I'll start right now." The room Lucien Vescari led her to was not a classroom. It was a sterile, white space dominated by high-end technology, but it felt as lifeless as a tomb. And in the center of it, hunched over a laptop, was Rowan Vescari. He was 9 years old, small for his age, with his father's dark hair and a profound, unnerving stillness. He did not look up when they entered. He did not acknowledge his father's introduction. Lucian's voice was clipped. "Rowan, this is Miss Quinn. She will be staying." The boy's focus remained locked on his screen, his fingers moving rapidly, manipulating blocks of code in what Harper recognized as a scratch programming interface. Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked at Harper, then at his son, and left the room without another word. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Harper alone with the silence. She did not approach the desk. She did not open the satchel containing her carefully prepared lesson plans. Instead, she knelt on the expensive rug, unzipping a large duffel bag she'd brought. Rowan's head remained bowed, but his typing slowed. He was listening. Harper didn't say hello. She began to unpack. She spread a colorful, laminated playmat on the floor. She placed a classic Rubik's Cube on it. Next, an amateur shortwave radio receiver. And finally, a large, detailed map of avian migration routes. The typing stopped. Harper smoothed the map. "The hawks should be catching the thermal currents over Gray Harbor this time of day," she said, almost to herself. "They ride them north, using the updrafts off the water." Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Rowan turned in his chair, his eyes, the same intense color as his father's, fixed on the map. He looked at her, then at the radio, his gaze sharp and calculating. He had been selectively mute, his father had explained, ever since a failed break-in at his previous school. He communicated, when he chose, through his laptop or written logic puzzles. He rolled his chair over, stopping just short of the mat. He picked up a notepad and a pen from a nearby table. He wrote, his handwriting precise. He held up the note. "If you can calculate the wind trajectory needed for a hawk to glide from the harbor to this tower, I will listen for 15 minutes. Harper looked at the map, then at the wall of windows showing the city skyline. She noted the flags on the distant buildings. "The wind is coming from the west-northwest," she murmured. She did the math in her head, factoring in the estimated altitude, the average glide speed of a red tail, and a simple interpolation for the urban heat effect. They'd need a sustained crosswind of about 12 knots, angled at 30 degrees from their starting point, to make it here without flapping. Rowan stared at her. He checked her mental calculation against a small program on his tablet. His eyes widened, just slightly. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. Behind her, Harper heard a faint sound. She glanced at the wall, which she'd assumed was just polished obsidian. In the dark glass, she caught a reflection. Lucien Viscari. He was standing in an observation room behind a one-way mirror, watching them. The rigid, steel-like mask he wore had softened, his expression caught in a moment of raw, unguarded surprise. Their eyes met in the reflection. Harper's heart gave a painful, awkward kick. He vanished from the glass. Rowan pushed the notepad back toward her. Harper smiled. "Okay, 15 minutes, but I have a counteroffer." She drew a box on the back of his note. "We'll call this the Shooting Star contract. For every math or science mission we complete down here, we get 10 minutes of real-world observation time. On the roof." Rowan's head snapped up. The roof. He looked at the map, then at her. He gave one single, decisive nod. Their first official lesson was interrupted by a man built like a refrigerator, wearing the North Shore Guardian Service insignia on his black polo. "Miss Quinn, I'm Cade, head of security detail." His voice was polite but absolute. A word. He led her into the hall. "Just so we're clear, the rooftop is a high-exposure area. We've just had intel that a rival group, the Alabaster Circle, scattered recon flycams over this district. You don't take the young master outside anywhere. Not without my clearance. Understood." Harper bristled. "I'm his teacher, not his jailer. He needs to see the sky. Here, safety is the first lesson." Lucian's voice came from behind her. He had emerged from the observation room, his expression once again cold and unreadable. "You will follow Mr. Cade's protocols or your employment will be terminated." The finality in his voice was absolute. Harper felt the familiar sting of powerlessness, the anger that came with being an employee rather than a partner. But she held his gaze. "Then you're tying my hands. He won't learn in a cage." Lucian studied her for a long moment. "Come with me." He led her down a different corridor, to a door that opened with his thumbprint. The room inside was dark, but as the door closed, the ceiling lit up. It was the night sky, a perfect simulated cosmos arched above them, the stars of the northern hemisphere gleaming with precise, astronomical accuracy. "The Polaris space," Lucian said, his voice softer now. "I built it after the incident, when he stopped speaking." He looked up at the artificial stars. "The 13 tutors I fired, they all saw him as a project, a problem to be solved. They brought charts and diagnostics. They wanted to fix him." He turned to her, his eyes shadowed. Not one of them thought to bring a map of the birds. The admission hung in the air, a raw, vulnerable nerve. Harper suddenly understood the man behind the armor. He wasn't just a client, he was a desperate father. "My daughter, Piper," Harper said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "She loves stars. I'm terrified I'm going to lose our apartment. The landlord is doubling the rent. I took this job because I'm out of options." Lucian was silent. He watched her, his expression unreadable, and took out his phone. He typed a quick, silent note. Harper assumed he was checking her references. She didn't know he was sending a single command Aldo. "Find out who owns Harper Quinn's building. Buy it." He pocketed the phone. "Your only concern, Miss Quinn, is Rowan. My concern is everything else." They returned to the classroom. The session continued. For the first time, Rowan used the shortwave radio at the end of the day. As Harper packed her bag, the boy approached her. He handed her a single sheet of paper, folded in half. She opened it. It was another one of his meticulously written notes. It wasn't a logic puzzle. It was a title. "Who is worthy of teaching me?" Below the title were 5 complex questions about physics, coding, and the migratory habits of ospreys. It was a test. Harper looked at Rowan, who was watching her with an expression of intense, fearful hope. She smiled, picking up her pen. "I accept." The sterile classroom transformed. Harper quickly realized the high-tech screens were more of a prison than a tool. She pushed the monitors aside. Their lessons moved to the vast penthouse kitchen. Math stopped being abstract symbols and became the fractional logic of whole-grain waffle recipes. They calculated ratios of flour to milk, the surface area of the waffle iron, and the glycemic index of maple syrup. Science became tactile. Harper brought in a mini anemometer, and they spent an hour by an open balcony door, with Cade watching from the hall, measuring wind speed and charting the data against the barometric pressure readings from Rowan's laptop. Reading comprehension was not about dusty novels. It was about deciphering technical bird journals and plotting migration patterns. After a week, Harper broached a new subject with Lucien. He needs a peer, someone his own age who isn't on staff. Lucien was resistant. His immediate response centered on security protocols, but Harper persisted. "It's Piper, my daughter, just for an hour." He finally relented. Piper, 6 years old and armed with a gap-toothed smile, bounced into the penthouse, entirely unimpressed by the marble floors. She just wanted to see Rowan's radio thing. Harper watched from the kitchen, her heart in her throat. Rowan, as usual, was silent, observing Piper as she chattered. They sat on the floor, surrounded by the shortwave radio components. Piper picked up a loose antenna. "Where does this sticky part go?" Rowan looked at Harper, then back at Piper. He leaned in close, so close his hair brushed her cheek, and whispered, a tiny, raspy sound. Harper could not hear the words, only the fact of them. He pointed to the receiver. Piper giggled and attached the wire. It was a breakthrough that 13 other tutors had never reached. As they worked, Harper noticed a pattern. Rowan could handle complex algebraic theory, but he consistently reversed numbers or struggled to recall specific mathematical symbols. It was not defiance, it was a processing gap. She tested her theory. "Rowan, what's 9 times 7? He typed 63. "How did you get that?" "He typed 7 times 10 is 70, minus 7. He was using advanced logic to bypass a simple memorization block. "It's called dyscalculia," she explained to Lucien later, finding him in his study. "A mild form. His brain just does not prioritize numeric symbols." Lucien's face darkened. "He has been labeled difficult his whole life." "He is not difficult, Reiki," Harper said firmly. "He just learns differently." She changed her method. She abandoned traditional notation, switching to color-coded blocks for equations and using rhythmic clapping patterns to memorize multiplication tables. The barriers dissolved. Rowan's progress was not just steady, it was explosive. Lucien often stood outside the open door, just out of sight, listening. He watched his son and this tiny, cheerful girl laugh as they built a circuit board. He saw Rowan actually explain the clapping pattern to Piper. He found Harper alone by the elevator that evening. He seemed awkward. A man accustomed to giving orders, not asking for help. "I do not know," he began, struggling. "How to praise him. When I do, it sounds hollow. He does not believe it." "He does not need praise for the big wins," Harper said gently. "He needs acknowledgement for the small victories." She grabbed a spare whiteboard from the study. "This is the Small Victories board. It is not about getting an A. It is about asked for help, or figured out the antenna, or taught Piper a rhythm. You add one every time you see him try." He stared at the board, this simple analog tool. It was the first time she had seen him look truly lost. She found him in the main kitchen late one night, long after Rowan was asleep. She had stayed late to prep the next day's science experiment. The penthouse was silent, the city lights glittering below like a fallen constellation. She was making hot cocoa for herself. He was pouring a dark, potent espresso. The silence stretched, but it was comfortable. "He spoke today," Lucien said, not looking at her. "He whispered, I heard him on the audio feed." "I know," Harper smiled. He took a sip of the espresso. "I grew up in the old Port District, near your neighborhood. Actually, before the money came. It was not San Cascadia then. It was just Gray Harbor." He traced the scar on his cheekbone with one finger. You did not survive by being soft. You did not survive by asking for help. You survived by being the one who did not need it. He was telling her why he did not know how to praise his son. He was telling her who he was. I had to be strong, he said, to make sure Rowan would never have to be. The moment of connection was shattered by the buzz of her phone on the counter. A text from an unknown number. Do not step any further into Vescari's world. Harper's blood went cold. She snapped the phone screen off, hoping he had not seen. But Lucien missed nothing. Bad news. No, she lied, her voice too high. Just my landlord, about the rent. Lucien's eyes narrowed. He knew she was lying, but he did not press. The threat was real. The next day, Cade looked grim. He pulled Harper aside. We have got eyes on us. The Alabaster Circle. They bribed a guard on the ground floor. We also spotted a high-spec drone hovering near the roof terrace. He stared hard at her. Your rooftop observation time is canceled, indefinitely. When Harper told Rowan, the light in his eyes dimmed. He retreated, his silence returning. Harper felt a surge of fury. She went straight to Lucien's office. This is what they want, she said, storming past Aldo Moretti. They want you to lock him back in the tower. They win if he stops learning. He needs to see the Hawks. Lucien. Before he could argue, Rowan appeared at the door. He walked past his father and silently offered Harper a small, perfect object. It was a single, gray-striped hawk feather. He must have found it on the balcony during one of their wind experiments. Harper took it, her throat tight. It was a token of trust. She pinned it to the small victories board. There is a place, she said, turning back to Lucien. Verdant Point. It is remote. Excellent for birding. A learning expedition. Cade can scout it. Lucien looked at the feather, then at his son, then at Harper. The battle between the Don and the father raged in his eyes. The father won. He will go, Lucien said, in a full escort. Verdant Point was a sweep of rocky coastline, smelling of salt and damp earth. Cade and 3 other North Shore guards secured the perimeter while Harper and Rowan set up a spotting scope. The sun was setting, turning the fog purple. Now, Harper whispered, pointing to the cliff face. As if on cue, a thermal shift sent thousands of seabirds launching from the cliffs, a swirling, screaming vortex of life against the twilight. Rowan gasped, a real, audible sound. He was mesmerized. The air was cold, the wind sharp off the water. Harper took off her own coat and wrapped it around Rowan's shoulders. Pulling the hood up, she had not realized Lucien was right behind her until she felt the heat radiating from him. He was so close his suit jacket brushed her back. He was not looking at the birds. He was looking at her, watching her protect his son. He stepped up beside her, his gaze finally shifting to the sky, then to Rowan. His voice was low, meant only for her, barely audible over the wind and the birds. Thank you, he said, for bringing him into the light. The trip to Verdant Point had changed the air in the penthouse. The professional boundary between Harper and Lucien had blurred, replaced by a quiet, vibrating tension. 2 days later, the invitation came. It was not a request from an employer. It was a simple statement. Dinner, tonight, my library, 8. Harper found herself accepting before she could analyze the risk. The library was not in the penthouse. It was a separate, secured space on the 60th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Harper understood why he had chosen it. The room was encased on 3 sides by 2-story glass, and the lights of San Cascadia glittered below them like a field of fallen stars. The air smelled of old leather and floor wax. Thousands of books lined the interior walls, their gold leaf spines catching the soft light. A single, small table was set for 2. The meal was served by silent staff who materialized and vanished, leaving them in absolute privacy. They spoke of Rowan, of the Small Victories board, which was now covered in blue marker, celebrating achievements like used the radio and taught Piper a chord. This room, Harper said, gesturing to the perfect alignment of steel beams and glass, the way the light fell across the shelves, It's magnificent. It feels intentional. Lucian paused, his wine glass halfway to his lips. "In another life," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I would have been an architect." He looked around the room, a flicker of a different man in his eyes. "I designed this space. Before I inherited my father's organization, before I had to learn a different kind of structure." The vulnerability of the admission startled her. "An architect," she repeated. It suited him. "And you?" he asked, his gaze pinning her. "If the world had not forced your hand, if you were not a mother, not struggling to pay rent." Harper looked out at the city, a place that had demanded so much from her. "An educational researcher," she said, the old dream feeling heavy on her tongue. "I wanted to develop new pedagogies, to find ways to teach the children that the system ignores." "Like Rowan," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. "Like Rowan," she confirmed. They were two people, defined by the heavy armor of their present, sharing a rare glimpse of the people they might have been. He leaned forward to refill her water glass. As he set the heavy crystal pitcher down, the backs of his fingers brushed the back of her hand, which was resting on the white tablecloth. It was not an accident. The contact was light, lasting only a full second, but it was electric, a deliberate, silent signal. Heat shot up her arm and her breath caught in her throat. She did not pull her hand away. "I need to be honest," Harper said, her voice quiet but firm, finally breaking the spell by moving her hand. The tower, the men in the lobby, the NDAs, it frightens me." She met his gaze. "I have spent every day since Piper was born fighting to be independent. I am terrified of depending on anyone, especially a man with your kind of power." He did not flinch. He simply nodded, as if he had expected this. "And he countered, his voice a low rumble. "I'm terrified of what I cannot protect. I control my environment. I control my business. It is how I keep Rowan safe." He leaned forward slightly. "It is the only way I know how to exist." "Control isn't the same as safety," she whispered. "For me," he replied, his eyes dark, "it has always been the same thing." As if the city itself were responding. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed against the glass wall. The massive pane shuddered with a deep, groaning sound. Harper flinched, a sharp, instinctive gasp escaping her as she pushed her chair back. In a single, fluid motion, Lucian was out of his seat and behind her. He did not grab her. He did not pull her away. He simply placed one large, warm hand flat on the small of her back. The pressure was solid, grounding. "I am here," he said, his voice close to her ear. "It is 3-inch reinforced glass. You are safe." She exhaled, her fear fading, and leaned back, just slightly, into the steady warmth of his hand. He did not move it. Slowly, she stood and turned to face him. He was closer than she had realized. The space between them crackled. There was no music, only the wind and their breathing. He took her hand, not the accidental brush from before, but a full, intentional grasp, lacing his fingers through hers. His other hand remained on her back, a solid anchor. He drew her forward a single step. They began to move, a slow, unscripted dance. They swayed, not to music, but to the sound of the wind outside and the rhythm of their own breathing. He led, and she followed, her body relaxing against his control. He was a paradox of iron and gentleness. She looked up at him, at the faint silver scar by his cheekbone, at the intensity in his eyes. He lowered his head. She rose slightly on her toes, her heart hammering. Their foreheads touched. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin, the clean, sharp scent of his suit. His breath fanned across her cheek. Their lips were a whisper apart, a question hanging in the charged air, held at a safe, respectful, agonizing distance. His phone vibrated. It was not a ring. It was a single harsh buzz from his jacket pocket. The spell shattered. Lucian stepped back, his expression hardening instantly, the architect vanishing and the dawn returning. He pulled the phone out, his eyes scanning the screen. "Cade," he answered. Harper watched his face turn to granite. What? His voice was lethally quiet. How? Who? A pause. Everyone. He snapped the phone shut and looked at Harper. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. There has been a data breach at the Metropolitan Integrity Office. The NDA I signed, she whispered. Worse, he said, his voice clipped. They did not get business files. They accessed the contingency protocols, the list of all personnel and their next of kin. He met her eyes. Your file was in that database. Harper, they have your name. They have Piper's, and they have your mother's address. Harper's stomach dropped, the blood draining from her face. Oh, God. Before she could even process the fear, Lucien was in motion. He was not a father or a dancer. He was a general. He hit an intercom on the library wall. Cade, Protocol Alpha, Package 1 and Package 2, secure transport to Safe House North Shore. Now. He turned to Aldo Moretti, who seemed to have materialized in the doorway. Lock down this building. Full sweep. Harper was dizzy. Package 1. What are you? Piper and your mother, he said, grabbing her coat. A North Shore team is retrieving them. Right now. They will be taken to a secure facility. They will be safe in less than 10 minutes. The speed, the absolute power with which he commanded the world was breathtaking. It was terrifying. She was a pawn in a game she did not understand. He escorted her to the private elevator. She was trembling. I do not... He stopped her, placing his hands firmly on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. They are doing this to scare you, to push you away from me, away from Rowan. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper that was both protective and profoundly intimate. I am not asking you to trust me. I am going to prove it. I will keep them safe. I will keep you safe. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. He released her. Go home. Cade will have a team outside your building all night. She stepped into the elevator, her mind reeling. The doors began to close, a wall of polished steel sliding between them. The last thing she saw was his intense, unwavering gaze. The doors sealed. Harper pressed her back against the cool glass wall of the elevator car, her legs shaking. She put one hand flat against her chest, feeling her heart pound a frantic rhythm against her palm. It was racing from pure, unadulterated of fear, and it was racing because of him. The attempt at normalcy felt fragile from the start. The children's science demonstration was being held downtown, and Lucien had insisted on a full security escort. 2 black, identical sedans moved through the gray afternoon mist of San Cascadia. Cade drove the primary car, his gaze sweeping a constant, restless pattern across the mirrors and side streets. In the back, Harper sat wedged between Rowan and Piper. Piper, oblivious to the tension, was chattering about volcanoes. Rowan was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. He clutched the handheld radio they had modified, monitoring the secure channel Cade had set for him. He was part of the team. They were 3 blocks from the venue when the static hit. It was not a crackle. It was a wall of white noise that flooded the radio. Cade's earpiece squealed. Signal jamming, Cade said, his voice dropping to a low, tactical calm. Ahead of them, the lead escort car, just 200 feet away, suddenly behaved erratically. Its brake lights flashed. It swerved, jumping the curb and slamming to a stop against a concrete planter. Its communication and navigation were dead. Cade did not have time to react. As he slowed, a plain white utility van, the kind that exists by the thousand in the city, shot out of a blind alley. It stopped dead, completely blocking the street. "Hold on," Cade yelled. He wrenched the wheel, aiming for the sidewalk, but the van was too fast. It lurched forward, blocking their escape. Harper's training as a mother took over. She did not scream. She moved. In one motion, she grabbed Piper and Rowan, yanking them both off the seats and onto the floor of the sedan, throwing her own body over them like a shield. Heads down, do not look up. Piper screamed, but Rowan did not. Beneath her, Harper felt him squirming, not in panic, but with focused intent. He still had the radio. The jammer was blocking reception, but a close-range broadcast might break through. He pressed the transmit button. His voice was thin and reedy, but he forced the words out. The protocol they had practiced in the penthouse. Beacon 7. Beacon 7. We are hostile. Coordinates 47.99. Proceeding west on Mariner's Embankment. Hostile vehicle is a white van. He was reading the secure GPS tracker, relaying their position. The classroom skill was saving their lives. The white van rammed their rear bumper. The impact was deafening, throwing Harper hard against the seat back, her head cracking against the door. Cade fought the wheel, the heavy sedan fishtailing on the wet pavement. He floored the accelerator, finding a gap and shooting onto the embankment road that ran along the foggy harbor. A loud pop sound echoed. Thick, gray smoke began to pour from the van behind them, engulfing the street in seconds. Smoke screen. Cade grunted, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. They're trying to blind us. Rowan, the signal! Harper yelled, her ears ringing. She fumbled in her own bag, her fingers closing around a small, square device they had finished building just last week. Rowan's design, a high-intensity micro-LED flare, programmed to strobe on a frequency visible only to North Shore's aerial surveillance. She slammed the activation button. On the sedan's roof, a small, green light, invisible in the fog to the naked eye, began to pulse. Miles away, in a black reinforced mobile command center disguised as a broadcast truck, Lucian Vescari watched 3 screens go dark. "I've lost the lead car's camera," an operator yelled. "Sir," a second operator called out, "Rowan's radio is active, audio only, but we have coordinates. They are on the embankment." A third screen flashed. "The micro-LED is hot, I have them. They are moving west, hostile in pursuit." Lucian's voice was pure ice, devoid of all emotion. "Deploy Mariner unit. Lock down both ends of the embankment. I want that van, and I want them alive." The chase was brutal. The fog was thick off the water, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. Cade was driving blind, relying on instruments, the white van dangerously close, ramming them again. The car spun. Harper's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a video message from an unknown number. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely open it. It was grainy footage, shot at night. Lucian, he was in a dark parking garage, shaking hands with a man whose face she recognized from Cade's security briefings, the leader of the Alabaster Circle. They were smiling. The implication was a physical blow. Lucian had set them up, the dinner, the dance. The confession in the library. Was it all a lie to gain access to her? To Rowan? For one sickening, paralyzing second, her world dissolved. She was a fool. She was a pawn. She looked down. Rowan was gripping the radio, his knuckles white. Piper was crying silently into her coat. This was real. The threat was real. She remembered their lessons. Trust the data, not the illusion. The video was grainy, compressed. It was designed to look plausible in a moment of panic. "It is a deep fake. Rowan," she said, her voice hard as steel, shocking herself. "Data, not drama. We trust the facts." She deleted the video. Cade saw his opening, a narrow gap between a seawall and a parked flatbed truck. He slammed the brakes, then spun the wheel hard, executing a perfect J-turn. The sedan's reinforced rear crashed into the front quarter panel of the white van. The sound of shearing metal was horrific. The van's front axle snapped, and it ground to a violent, scraping halt. Before the smoke even cleared, 2 black SUVs, the Mariner unit, swarmed the scene. Men in black tactical gear materialized from the fog, surrounding the disabled van. The sedan door was yanked open. "Miss Quinn, kids, you are secure." The adrenaline left Harper's body in a single, agonizing rush. She began to shake violently. It was over. They were alive. She pulled Rowan and Piper into a desperate, crushing hug, and the terror of the last 5 minutes finally broke her. She buried her face in Rowan's hair and sobbed. Rowan, who had been rigid with shock, slowly, hesitantly, put his arms around her. He patted her back, his small hand firm. He leaned in, and this time, it was not a whisper. His voice was clear, steady, and loud enough for Cade to hear over the shouting guards. "It is okay, Harper. You do not need to be afraid." Another car screeched to a halt. Lucian Vescari threw the door open before it had even stopped moving. He ignored the tactical team, ignored the men being pulled from the van, his eyes, wild with a terror she had never seen, were only on the back of the sedan. He saw Harper, pale and crying, clutching his son. He pulled his own heavy wool overcoat from his shoulders and wrapped it around Harper, Rowan and Piper, shielding them all in its warmth. His face was a mask of cold fury and profound, agonizing relief. "I was late," he said. The words were quiet, a confession of failure that seemed to tear him apart. By the time they reached the tower, the fallout had begun. The fake video had vanished, but the incident on the embankment was already being spun on fringe news forums as a Vescari rival gang dispute. The Interstate Crime Board, citing the rumors, released a public statement. They were officially reviewing the financial activities of Vescari Holdings. Harper got both children settled, the adrenaline fading to a dull, aching exhaustion. Cade had confirmed her mother and Piper were being moved to an even more secure, undisclosed North Shore location, finally hours later. She stood at the door of her own apartment. Tucked under the doormat, having bypassed Lucian's perimeter guards, was a plain, white envelope. Inside, a single typed note. "If you want to protect your child, leave him before Friday." The anonymous note, folded and sharp, felt like a sliver of ice in Harper's pocket. Leave him before Friday. Today was Thursday. She ignored it. There was a school fair. In the face of threats, normalcy became an act of defiance. The penthouse kitchen was covered in flour. Harper, Rowan, and Piper were working on their kitchen math project for the fair. They had baked 36 star-shaped cookies. Now, they were using licorice ropes to divide them into fractional parts, calculating percentages of frosting coverage, and writing out the equations on a bright blue presentation board. Piper, who was in charge of sprinkles, was eating most of her data. Rowan, for the first time, was laughing freely. He had personally, nervously, invited his father. Harper was expecting Lucian Vescari, the Don, but the man who showed up at Piper's public school gymnasium that afternoon was just Lucian. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray cashmere sweater, his hair slightly undone. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a tired father, and he seemed profoundly out of place. He did not stand back. He walked directly to their table. "Rowan," he said, his voice quiet, "this looks impressive. Where do I set up the graphing charts?" As Lucian, the man from the newspapers, bent down to arrange the cookie platters, the whispers started. Parents clustered, their smiles tight, their voices low. "That's him. Vescari. Mafia rumors." Rowan, who'd been standing tall, began to shrink. He folded his arms, his gaze dropping to the floor, the bright light in his eyes dimming. Harper felt a surge of cold fury. She stepped forward, ignoring the staring parents, and took Rowan's hand in hers. She held it firmly, bringing it to her side. She looked at him, not at the crowd. "Today is your day, Rowan," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Do not let anyone else take it from you." When it was his turn, Rowan walked to the small microphone. He hesitated. Lucian tensed, ready to intervene, but Harper gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Rowan looked at Harper, who smiled and nodded. He took a deep breath, and he began to speak, his voice clear and steady about the golden ratio as found in star patterns. When he finished, the gymnasium was silent for a beat. Then a few parents, moved by the boy's earnestness, began to clap. The applause grew, drowning out the whispers. The victory was short-lived. As they were packing up, a woman in a severe pantsuit approached them. "Miss Quinn, I am from the Metropolitan Integrity Office. We have received some concerns about Rowan Vescari's educational environment. We are simply a charitable oversight body. but I do need to ask you a few questions." Lucian stepped in front of Harper instantly. "You will speak to my counsel." "No," Harper said, placing a hand on his arm. The Lucian in the sweater stopped. Surprised, she looked at the woman. I will speak with you. I have nothing to hide." In a drab cinderblock meeting room, the woman clicked her pen. "Miss Quinn, our concern is stability. Given Mr. Viscari's public profile, we must ensure the child is not in an environment of ethical or moral compromise." Harper did not get defensive. She reached into her bag and placed a thick, bound file on the table. "Here is Rowan's academic progress file. 3 months ago, he was selectively mute and tested 2 grade levels behind in symbol recognition. Today, he is coding in 2 languages and just delivered a public presentation on advanced geometry. Here are his baseline psychological profiles. And here are the weekly reports from his speech therapist, showing a 90% increase in voluntary vocalization. You are worried about moral compromise. I am proving academic fact. He is safe, he is happy, and he is thriving." The woman stared at the data. She slowly closed her notebook. She had come prepared for a scandal, not for a curriculum. She was left with nothing to say. As Harper left the room, her eyes scanned the crowded hallway. She saw the MOI representative stop to speak with another parent, a woman with sleek blonde hair and a cold, polite smile, Nadia Crest. She'd been one of the parents whispering the loudest. As the representative walked away, Nadia's eyes met Harper's. The smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, icy calculation. Harper knew, with chilling certainty. She was looking at the alabaster circle. That night, after the children were asleep, Lucian found her in his study. He did not speak. He simply placed a small velvet box and a single new key on the desk. "It is a new condo, 2 floors below, in your name. The deed is in the box. Piper and your mother can move in tomorrow. You will be safe. You will be secure." It was a fortress. It was a gilded cage. Harper looked at the key, the symbol of absolute dependency. She thought of the woman from the MOI, of her own fight to stand on her own feet. She slid the key back across the polished wood. "No." Lucian looked stunned. "Harper, this is not a—" "I know what it is," she said softly. "It is you, protecting, the way you know how. But I cannot. I need my agency. Lucian, I cannot be one of your assets." She paused. "You helped me get that scholarship to finish my special education certification. That is help I will accept. That is a tool. This," she tapped the key, "is a leash." He stared at her, the confusion on his face warring with a dawning respect. Later, she found him on the rooftop terrace, the place they were supposed to have their lessons. The city was quiet, the stars were brilliant. They stood in silence for a long time, the wind cool against their faces. "You were right," he said. "I just want to be a partner," she said, "not a possession." He turned to her. The city lights softened the hard lines of his face. "I have never had a partner." "Maybe it is time you did." He reached out, his movements slow, giving her time to pull away. He did not. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her face. His hand lingered, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. The simple, non-threatening touch sent a shiver through her entire body. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not like the library. There was no hesitation. It was slow, deep, and profoundly certain. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of deliberate, absolute connection. She tasted the faint bitterness of his coffee, felt the warmth of his breath mingle with hers. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. His hand slid from her cheek to the small of her back, holding her firmly, a silent promise of support, not control. He kept it respectful, a solid, anchoring presence. When they broke apart, they did not move away. She rested her forehead against his chest. "If you want me to stay, Lucian," she whispered into the soft cashmere of his sweater. "Let me stand beside you, not behind you." He tightened his arm around her, pulling her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Partners," he said, his voice a low, rough vow, "not subordinates." The peace of the moment held, perfect and fragile under the stars. It lasted until they returned to the penthouse. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a new, urgent notification. It was an automated alert from her email. A doctor's appointment for Piper, scheduled for the next morning, had just been remotely canceled. A second alert followed. An unauthorized login attempt had just been made on Piper's new school registration account. The threat was no longer a warning. It was active. The unauthorized access to Piper's records was a violation that felt different. The ambush had been a physical threat, but this was an intrusion into her life, into her child's future. The note under her door was a deadline, Friday. Harper sat in the penthouse study long after midnight, a legal pad in front of her. She was a tutor, a mother. She was not a strategist, but she was a pattern finder. She listed every event. 1. The drone sighting on the roof. 2. The data leak about her family. 3. The ambush at the embankment. 4. The MOI agent and Nadia Crest at the school. 5. The hack of Piper's medical and school files. She began adding timestamps and personnel. A cold, sick feeling washed over her as she saw the name, Cade. Cade had been on shift or directly involved in all 5 incidents. He had reported the drone. He had discovered the data leak. He had been driving the car during the ambush. He had been in charge of security at the school. It could not be. The man who had driven them to safety, who had remained impossibly calm. The man who had personally overseen her mother's move to the safe house. She remembered his voice. Hold on, and the calculated way he had taken the impact. He had saved them. She crumpled the paper, angry at herself. The suspicion felt like a betrayal. It was a dead end. The answer came from the one person no one had considered. Rowan had been working on his own project, a complex link map of the Vescari network. It was how his mind worked not in lists, but in visual connections. He had overheard Harper and Lucian arguing, their voices tight with fear and frustration, about the inside man. Quietly, Rowan began to trace the data packets from the hack on Piper's school. He did not look for people. He looked for the path. He found it. A tiny, rerouted data stream bounced through 3 offshore servers that had originated not from an external IP, but from a terminal inside Vescari Tower. A terminal logged in, under the highest privilege, to Aldo Moretti. He did not stop. He cross-referenced the terminal's activity. He found 2 encrypted outbound transfers, disguised as legal filing fees, sent to a numbered account. He then mapped that account's activity. It had a single, recurring crypto transaction, a payment to a digital wallet associated with the Alabaster Circle. He walked into the study, where Lucian was pacing and Harper was staring at the wall. He laid a printout on the desk. It was his link map. In the center was Aldo's name, with a bright red line connecting him to Nadia Crest. The name was like a physical blow. Lucian looked at the paper, his face ashen. Aldo, his father's consigliere, the man who had been at his side for 20 years. He did not rage. His voice became frighteningly calm. "Cade," he said into his intercom, "I want eyes on Moretti. I want to see the snake." Cade, loyal and efficient, did not question the order. He was the best at his job. Within 3 hours, he was sending encrypted photos to Lucian's phone. The images were grainy, shot with a long lens through thick fog. Aldo Moretti, his expensive overcoat pulled tight, standing on an abandoned shipping pier. He was passing a slim data drive to the woman from the school, Nadia Crest. The proof was absolute. The betrayal was complete. Lucian stood by the glass wall, looking down at the city he owned. The pain radiating from him was a cold, dark thing. "He will disappear," Lucian said, his voice flat. "He will be taken from the pier, and he will be handled the way my father would have handled him, the old way." "No?" Lucian turned. Harper was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression resolute. "You cannot," she said, her voice shaking but unbroken. "Not just because it is wrong, but because he is watching." She nodded toward the open door of the classroom, where Rowan sat, pretending to read, but his shoulders were rigid with tension. "That is my world, Harper. That is how I keep us safe." "Is it?" she challenged him, walking closer. "You told me you wanted to be a different kind of father. You told me you built the Polaris space so he would not have to live in the shadows. This is the shadow?" She put her hand on his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Expose him with the light, Lucian. Let your son see his father choose the law, even when it is the hardest thing to do." He stared at her, the internal war visible on his face, the Don versus the father. He looked past her, at his son, small and silent in the doorway. He closed his eyes, a single, shuddering breath escaping him. When he opened them, the cold rage was gone, replaced by a weary, pained resolve. He nodded. The plan was born from Harper's world, not Lucian's. Operation Broadwing, Rowan had named it, after the Hawks. The Vascari Foundation was already scheduled to host a large charity education seminar on Friday. Harper was the keynote speaker. "Aldo has to be there," Harper reasoned. The group assembled in the study. He's the face of the foundation's legal side. He cannot risk looking guilty by not showing up, especially with the Interstate Crime Board sniffing around. "So we trap him in public?" Kate asked. "Not just in public," a new voice said. It was a cybersecurity expert Harper had brought in from the university, the one helping with her certification. "We trap him digitally. Rowan, Piper, you two will run the main presentation from a clean laptop." He looked at the kids. "Your job is to make sure the slides work." He turned back to Lucian. "While they are doing that, I will be monitoring the guest network. Mr. Moretti will log in. He's too arrogant not to. When he does, we will use his authenticated login to push a system update to his personal device. This update is a lure. It will flash a decoy screen on his phone, one that looks like his hidden crypto wallet, asking him to confirm a transaction. The moment he interacts with it, we have a legally admissible digital fingerprint of him accessing the illicit account, recorded by a neutral third party, me." Lucian looked at the expert, then at Harper. A technical lure. Legal. Clean. He turned to Cade. "When the trap is sprung, your team will detain him. Quietly. No violence. Package the evidence from the expert and transmit it, through an anonymous, clean channel, to the Interstate Crime Board. We will let them take the win." The night before the seminar, the penthouse was quiet. The children were asleep. Harper stood in the library, staring at the glittering lights, her heart hammering. She was a teacher tomorrow. She was walking into a trap, as bait. She sensed him before she heard him. Lucian came up behind her, standing so close she could feel the heat from his body. He did not touch her. Not at first. He just stood with her, a silent, solid presence in the dark. "You're trembling," he said. "I am terrified," she whispered. "This is not my world. Lucian, I do not know how to do this." Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against the solid wall of his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his hold secure, protective. "I know," he murmured, his lips brushing the hair above her ear. "You are asking me to put my trust in a system I have spent my life bypassing, and I am asking you to walk into the fire." He held her tighter. "If everything breaks tomorrow, Harper, if the old world pulls me back, I want you to know that I am choosing this. I am choosing your way. Protection through the law." As he held her, miles away, in the damp, cold fog of the abandoned pier, Nadia Kress snapped a new data drive into her laptop. Aldo Moretti paced nervously. "The seminar is too public. What if he knows?" Nadia smiled, the expression chilling in the dim light. "Relax, Aldo. It is perfect. On Friday, while everyone is watching The Teacher and The Miracle Boy, we will be pushing live stream on Lucian Vascari's real life. We have everything, the accounts, the shipments, the Mariner unit. He will not recover." The 60th floor was a pressure cooker, packed with journalists, educators, and the financial elite of San Cascadia. Outside the two-story glass, the sky was a dark, bruised purple, and the first drops of a violent rain began to lash against the windows, a frantic drumming that matched Harper's pulse. She stood at the podium, the small lavalier microphone cool against her dress. She was not looking at the cameras. She was looking at the back of the room, where Lucien stood against the wall, Cade a silent shadow beside him. Harper took a breath and began. Her voice, amplified, was clear and steady. Every child, she said, deserves to learn in the language they understand. Some speak in words, some in numbers, and some speak in the patterns of migrating birds. The room, accustomed to corporate platitudes, grew quiet, listening. In the third row, Aldo Moretti sat, his face a mask of practiced benevolence. He pulled out his personal tablet, a look of mild annoyance on his face. It was his turn to present the Vascari Foundation's charitable giving slides. He tapped the screen, connecting to the secure guest network. In the tech booth at the back of the room, the university cyber expert watched his monitor. "He is in," he whispered to Rowan. "The trap is set." As Harper spoke her final introductory sentence, the massive presentation screen behind her did not show her slides. It split into two columns. On the left, Vascari Foundation, official transfers. On the right, labeled in stark red, Alabaster Circle Crypto Wallet 77A. A single, simultaneous gasp sucked the air from the room. Aldo's face drained of color. This was not the plan. He looked at the screen, at the parallel transactions, the clean donations and the hidden, illicit payments displayed for the entire world. "Technical difficulties," Aldo yelled. Jumping from his seat, he fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling out a small USB drive, a network killer. He lunged for the podium, pushing past a startled Harper, and jammed the drive into the laptop. The main screen went black. Aldo smiled, a thin, desperate expression. "He cut the primary feed," Rowan said, his voice high but steady in the tech booth. Switching to backup, he hit a key. "Now, Piper." Piper, her small face illuminated by the glow of a separate, clean laptop, clicked the mouse. The screens roared back to life. They did not show the bank transfers. They showed a single, complex string of characters. The cyber expert, patching his own mic into the audio feed, spoke over the crowd. "That," his voice boomed, "is the unique digital signature of the device that just attempted to breach the network, and it is the same signature that authenticated access to Aldo Moretti's hidden crypto wallet just 2 minutes ago." Down in the main lobby, Nadia Kress saw the feed on her phone. The trap had been reversed. She signaled her team. "The tech booth, get the hardware. Now." 6 men dressed as catering staff dropped their trays and bolted for the service elevators. They did not make it 5 feet. The main glass doors hissed open, and the Mariner unit, dressed in the dark blue uniforms of Vascari Tower's elite security, formed a solid, unmoving wall. The confrontation was not a firefight. It was a silent, brutal ballet of efficiency. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The 6 men subdued and cuffed on the marble floor. Cade, having monitored from the entrance, adjusted his tie. "Lobby is secure," he said into his cufflink. But one had gotten through. "Sir," the expert's voice crackled in Cade's ear, "we have a problem. One of them must have used the fire stairs. We are losing the main broadcast antenna on the roof. They are cutting the signal." On the 60th floor, the screens went black again. "The signal is dead," a journalist yelled. Harper looked at Lucien. He was trapped. 2 of Nadia's men, already planted in the audience, were closing in on him, blocking his path to the exit. He was cut off. Harper knew the building. She had memorized the blueprints Rowan used for his win calculations. She ran. She burst through the emergency exit and scrambled up the stairs to the roof, emerging into a howling chaos of wind and rain. A man in black was halfway up the main broadcast mast, using a pair of bolt cutters on the thick primary cable. Harper saw the heavy, coiled safety tether used by the window washers. She remembered the knots Rowan had taught her, the figure-8 follow-through. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, threaded the rope, secured the clip to the railing, and wrapped the line around her waist. "Get away from there!" she screamed over the wind. The man turned, shocked to see her. He raised the cutters. Harper did not hesitate. She ran straight at the mast, grabbing the severed, sparking cable. She jammed the heavy plug back into the port, holding it in place with both hands as the wind tore at her, using her own body and the tension of the safety line as a human bridge to complete the connection. Downstairs, the screens lit up again, showing Aldo's panicked face. The two men reached Lucien, cornering him against the glass wall. "Just come with us, Mr. Vescari," one hissed, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Lucien moved. He did not move like an architect or even a father. He moved with a cold, precise economy. He used the first man's arm to block the second, turning their own momentum against them. It was a blur of joint locks and restrained, powerful blocks. He did not throw a single punch. As the two men crumpled, disarmed, and immobilized, Lucien pulled 2 nylon zip ties from his pocket and secured their hands. He looked up, straight into the lens of a nearby news camera. "We choose the law," he said, his voice perfectly clear. In the tech booth, the expert yelled, "The signal is stable. The evidence packet is uploading, Piper." Her face a mask of concentration. "Hit the enter key." "Sent," she whispered. Cade's team entered the conference room, weapons holstered, and calmly put their hands on Aldo Moretti. Aldo's sanity snapped. "You cannot do this," he shrieked, his eyes wild, finding Lucien in the crowd. "The courts will bury you, Vescari. They will tear you apart for this. You cannot escape who you are." The side door opened. Harper walked in, soaked to the skin, rain and sweat plastering her hair to her face, the heavy safety harness still clipped to her waist. She stopped in front of Aldo. "No," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "The truth will." All eyes were on them. Then, a new sound, a high-pitched microphone squeal. Rowan had left the tech booth. He was standing at the podium, his small body shaking, looking at the sea of cameras. You write stories about my father," Rowan said, his voice small but carrying. "But he built me a sky." He looked across the room at Lucien, who was watching him with an expression of shattered, raw pride. "I trust my father." The room was completely silent. Then, one journalist in the back, a man known for his cynicism, slowly began to clap, then another. It was not polite applause, it was a storm. The stage lights went down. The press surged forward. Cade's team formed a protective circle, guiding Lucien, Harper, and the children out. Hours later, the tower was quiet. The rain had softened to a mist. On the roof, among the distant, circling lights of news helicopters, Harper stood wrapped in Lucien's dry overcoat. He did not speak. He just pulled her to him, his arms locking around her as if she were the only anchor in the world. He pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, the wind whipping around them. The love that had been a silent, dangerous current between them was finally, terrifyingly, clear. The news cycle exploded, but the narrative had shifted. With the admissible, third-party evidence package transmitted by the university expert, the Interstate Crime Board had more than enough. Aldo Moretti and Nadia Crest were detained on a slew of federal charges, from conspiracy to wire fraud. The Metropolitan Integrity Office, exposed as a hollow front organization, was immediately dissolved, and its board placed under cross-investigation for abetting the Alabaster Circle's activities. But the real story, the one that shocked San Cascadia, was the ICB's public statement. They formally noted the full and transparent cooperation of Vescari Holdings in dismantling the criminal ring. For the first time, Lucien's name was associated not with the rumors of the underworld, but with the rule of law. He did not waste the opportunity. His legitimate businesses, stabilized by the sudden positive press, recovered. At a press conference 2 days later, a conference he let his new legal team run, he announced the formation of the Broadwing Scholarship Fund. It was a massive endowment, dedicated to funding advanced educational tools and specialized tutors for children with learning disabilities. He made only one public stipulation. The fund's curriculum and operations would be managed by an independent academic director, Miss Harper Quinn. Peace settled over the penthouse. It was a new, breathable air. Rowan, no longer shielded by silence, stood before his new classmates and delivered a 5-minute oral presentation on atmospheric physics, never once looking at a notebook. Piper, who Harper had enrolled in the same private academy, was immediately invited to join the Junior STEM Club, where she promptly declared she would build a better radio. Harper watched them one afternoon at a park near Gray Harbor, the two of them working together to untangle a complex, hawk-shaped kite. They were, she realized with a start, just children. They were happy. Harper, too, made her move. She packed her few belongings from the old rail district. The key to the high-security luxury condo Lucian had offered sat on her desk, in its velvet box. She slid it back to him during a planning meeting. "I cannot, Lucian," she said quietly. "It is not my home." He looked at the key, then at her, and a slow, deep understanding passed between them. He did not argue. He simply nodded. 2 weeks later, Harper signed a lease on a small, 2-bedroom rental house with a little yard, just 3 blocks from the school. She paid the deposit and the first month's rent with the first paycheck she earned as director. It was small, it was modest, and it was hers. The new dynamic was fragile, adult. He came to her house that evening. A cold rain was falling, a cleansing sound against the windows of her new reading room. The children were asleep. They sat on her old sofa, a stack of curriculum proposals on the cushion between them. They were arguing, softly, about the merits of kinetic learning versus digital interfaces. He was watching her, not the papers. "You were right about the house," and he said. She paused, pen in hand. "It is important that I stand on my own." He closed the file, slowly, deliberately. He draped his arm over the back of the sofa, his fingers lightly brushing her shoulder. It was a question. Harper leaned back, resting her head against his arm, and then, finally, against his chest. He exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath, and wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "This is better than the tower," she whispered. "It is quiet," he said, his voice a low rumble. She looked up at him. He lowered his head, and their lips met. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss on the rooftop. This was a kiss of profound, quiet certainty. It was slow and deep, acclaiming. His hand, which had been resting on her shoulder, moved to lace his fingers with hers. Her other hand came to rest flat on his chest, feeling the sharp, unsteady intake of his breath. A warm, tingling energy spread through her, a response to the simple, solid pressure of his hold. His lips were soft. His hand in hers was strong. It was enough. A small, soft tap-tap came from the hallway door. "Mommy?" They broke apart instantly, but there was no panic, no guilt. Lucian released her hand, his expression softening as he looked toward the door. Harper smiled at him, a look of shared affection. Before she called out, "It is okay, sweetie, come in." Later, after Piper was settled back in her own bed, Lucian found Harper in the kitchen. She was making tea, her back to him. "I want this. Harper," he said, his voice raw. "The quiet, the chaos. I want you, and I want the children. I want us to be a family." Harper stopped, her hand frozen on the kettle. She turned, leaning back against the counter, her heart hammering. A family has to have rules, Lucian, real ones, not just assumptions based on power. "Name them," he said, without a single hesitation. She took a breath. The 4-point covenant, one absolute transparency, no more shadows, the parts of your world that are not clean. "I will not be ignorant. I will not be made a fool of again." "Agreed," he said. "To consent. My life and Piper's life are not yours to command. You do not move my family or make security decisions for us without my being a full partner in that decision." "Agreed." 3, legal safety. Everything we build, this family, this fund, must be protected by the law, not just by your men. "It will be." "And 4, she said, fixing him with a look, "you will not cross my professional boundaries. As director of the fund, I am your equal, not your employee. You will not override my academic decisions, ever." He walked toward her. He did not pull out a ring. He took a pen from his jacket, grabbed a paper napkin from the counter, and wrote, "The 4-Point Covenant." He signed his name at the bottom with a firm, black stroke. He then reached into his pocket and placed a single, familiar key on the counter, the key to the Polaris space. "This is not a gift," he said softly. "It is yours. You have academic co-ownership. It is your classroom now, as much as it is my son's." It was an indirect proposal, a contract, a commitment. Harper looked at the signed napkin, her throat tight. It was almost everything. But she needed one more piece of consent. She did not ask Rowan. She let the new piece settle. The following Sunday, she found Rowan at the kitchen table, painting with a set of watercolors. He was intensely focused. Hours later, he shyly presented the painting to her. It was not of the tower. It was not of a hawk. It was a simple painting of the grassy lawn in their new backyard, under a brilliant, starry sky. On the grass, holding hands, were 4 figures: a tall man, a woman with dark hair, a small boy, and a smaller, gap-toothed girl. It was his blessing. That night, for the first time in her adult life, Harper felt a sense of complete safety. She locked the front door of her small house, checked on her sleeping daughter, and felt the weight of the world lift. As the house settled into silence, a thin, black envelope slid noiselessly under the front door. Coming to rest on the welcome mat, it sat in the darkness, waiting for the morning light. The note inside was typed. The message brief? "Not over. Rowan's father isn't the only one with blood debts." The black envelope was a declaration of war, but not from a ghost. The ICB, now fully cooperating with Lucien, traced the threat back to its source, Silas Core, a name Lucien knew only as a shadow from his father's past, a brutal figure from the old Gray Harbor docks. Core had been the secret hand behind the Alabaster Circle, and Aldo Moretti had been his tool. His plan was vindictive and simple: use the public launch of the Broadwing Scholarship Fund to stage a massive digital heist, draining its accounts and simultaneously planting fabricated evidence to frame Harper Quinn as the operator. He intended to destroy Lucien's legitimate legacy and his new family at the same moment. This time, Lucien did not retreat to the tower. Harper, Cade, Lucien, and the university's cybersecurity team gathered in Harper's small living room. "He is attacking the fund," Harper said, her voice hard. "He's using children as leverage. We end this my way." The plan was named Operation Falling Star. The launch event, scheduled for that Friday, was not moved. It was held at the Gray Harbor Planetarium, a symbolic move away from the Vescari fortress. Silas, they reasoned, would be expecting a defensive crouch. They gave him an open stage. Harper's university team built the public-facing donation portal, but behind the firewall, they constructed a digital trap, a honeypot, a mirror image of the donation accounts, invisible to the donor but irresistible to the thief. The night of the event was electric. The planetarium was packed. Harper stood at the podium, Lucien watching from the front row, his gaze unwavering. As Harper began to speak about the promise of education, Silas Core, disguised as a journalist in the mezzanine, activated his attack. He triggered the malware, expecting to siphon $2 million from the seed fund. He thought he was stealing. He was instead broadcasting. The massive 360-degree dome above the audience, meant to display constellations, suddenly lit up. It did not show stars. It showed Silas Core's entire transaction, his device signature, the illicit offshore account. the rerouting path all displayed in stark, white text for the press and the ICB agents disguised as guests to see. "The honeypot is active," the university expert whispered into his comms. "We have him." Silas saw his data on the screen. He realized the trap. He panicked in the chaos. As agents began to move, he bolted, grabbing the nearest person as a shield. It was Rowan, who was standing near the stage. The room descended into chaos. Silas pulled a knife, holding it close to Rowan's body. "Nobody moves," he screamed. "Get me a car, Vascari, or the boy dies." Lucian started forward, a primal roar in his throat, but Cade stopped him. "Boss, no, let her." Harper stepped forward, her hands up, her voice clear. "Let him go, Silas." She was not looking at Core. She was looking only at Rowan. She tapped her fingers against her own leg, a fast, rhythmic pattern. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The rhythm they used to memorize prime numbers. The rhythm for 5. It was a 5-second countdown. Rowan's eyes, wide with terror, locked on hers. He saw the pattern. He began to breathe with her rhythm. 4, 3, 2. "On 1? Harper yelled. "Now!" Rowan did not fight. He used the skill Cade had drilled into him. He dropped his center of gravity, collapsing his knees and tucking his chin, becoming a dead weight. Silas, expecting resistance, was thrown off balance for a single, crucial second. Cade was already moving. He was not a bodyguard, he was a guardian. He bypassed the knife, his movements economical and absolute. He neutralized the threat with a joint lock and a rotation, separating Silas from Rowan cleanly. The knife clattered to the floor. It was over. Harper snatched Rowan, holding him tight, her body shaking. Lucian vaulted onto the stage, ignoring Silas as the ICB agents cuffed him. He went straight to the podium, his face pale, his eyes wet. "For my entire life," he said into the microphone, his voice breaking, "I chose power. I chose the old ways. I thought fear made me strong." He looked at Harper, who was rocking Rowan, and his voice steadied. "I was wrong. Today, I choose the law. I choose this." The room was silent, and then the applause began, a tidal wave of sound. Harper held Rowan's face. "It is over. You are safe." Rowan pulled back, looking at his father, who was now surrounded by flashing cameras, not as a suspect, but as a witness. "I'm not scared anymore," Rowan said, his voice loud and clear. Lucian heard him. He closed his eyes, the last wall of his armor crumbling to dust. The true resolution came a week later, not in a storm, but in quiet. Lucian asked Harper to meet him at the school, in the classroom where they had first truly met. The room was empty. On the blackboard, someone had written the 4-point covenant in neat chalk script. Lucian stood beside it. "I cannot promise you a life without shadows, Harper," he said, his voice quiet, "but I promise to stand with you in the light, our rules." He did not kneel. He held out his hand. In his palm was a simple band of white gold. "Be my partner," he said, "in everything." She smiled, the tears coming fast. "Yes." A delighted squeal echoed from the hall. Piper burst in, cheering, followed by Rowan, who was holding a piece of paper. He smiled, that rare, brilliant smile, and handed the paper to Lucian. It was from the Small Victories board. One line. "Family achieved." The wedding was small, held on the cliffs of Gray Harbor as the sun went down. The only witnesses were the children and Cade. The wind was cold, tasting of salt, and the lights of San Cascadia began to glow in the distance. When Lucian kissed her, it was a promise, sweet and deep. He held her, his hand warm and steady on her back, her head resting on his shoulder. Her heart was quiet, listening only to the sound of the waves. It ended as it began, high above the city, on the rooftop of Vascari Tower. The 4 of them lay on a blanket, the Polaris space dark. They were watching the real moon. Piper was asleep, tucked against Harper's side. Rowan and Lucian were quietly pointing out satellites. A pair of hawks, hunting late, soared past the glowing disk. "We chose the light, Harper whispered, her hand finding his. Lucian laced his fingers through hers, pulling her and his son closer. And the light, he replied, chose us back. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from. Please comment below to connect with us and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.